For Scandinavia, the 5th century was a prosperous time. Agriculture and trade were booming, and the population was growing. But this will not last. A volcano eruption so large it covered the whole world in a hazy mist, so the growth was no more. Instead, death, destruction, and chaos persisted. This was a real-life Ragnarök. But we have to start at the place where all roads lead, Rome. The Roman Empire was crumbling in the 5th century. With rebellions and raids from foreign invaders, this superpower was on its last leg.
This is a channel about the Vikings. Why are you talking about Rome?
I mean, everyone loves Rome. Name one person who doesn't love Rome. Oh. Anyway, if you watched my previous video, you would assume that the Viking Age started with the famous raids on the west, specifically on June 8, 793, when the Lindisfarne monastery was sacked. Well, you are technically correct, but it's not that simple. Scandinavian society didn't just change from one day to another, but it was a series of events, from crumbling empires to climate catastrophes, that caused this change. But what is a Ragnarök? Ragnarök is the Norse mythological doomsday. It comprises of two elements, Ragna, meaning the ruling powers or gods, and Rök, meaning fate, doom or twilight. It is the twilight of the gods. It unfolds as a series of escalating events, beginning with the death of Balder, god of light and beauty. Then the Fimbulwinter comes, 3 consecutive winters with no intervening summers. Snow falls from all directions. Frost becomes unbearable, razor-sharp winds come, and the sun loses all warming power. Then the sun and the moon get swallowed by the wolves Skoll and Hati, and all chaos breaks loose. Fenrir breaks free from the chains that bind him, and swallows Odin. Jormungandr rolls around in the sea, causing catastrophic floods. Surtur, the fire giant from Muspelheim, arrives in Asgard with his blazing sword. Loki, bound beneath the earth with a serpent venom dripping on his face, breaks free. Vidar, the son of Odin, avenges him and kills Fenrir. Jormungandr is killed by Thor, but he also falls from the serpent's venom. Heimdall and Loki kill each other. Freyr, who surrendered his magical sword for love, falls to Surtur's flames. It is the cosmological end of the Norse fate. The prophecy appears in the Völuspá, the prophecy of the seers, which was composed in the mid-10th century. This poem is preserved primarily in 2 manuscripts, the Codex Regius, dated approximately 1270, and the Hauksbok, dated around 1334. The version of the 2 sources differs substantially, but this topic is for another day. The most popular and well-known version of the prophecy appears in the Poetic Edda, a collection of Old Norse poems compiled in the 13th century from earlier oral traditions, and the Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson. The idea that there is a connection of real-life events to mythology was not something I came up with myself. This gets investigated by historians more and more. This video specifically is inspired by Neil Price's book, The Children of Ash and Elm, and I've relied heavily on the book for this video among other research papers. You can find these in the description if you want to investigate further. And while you're there, why not subscribe? This is where we get back to Rome. The empire collapsed in the 5th century, so Europe was going through a turbulent time. There was instability, but also opportunity, mostly for a few at the expense of many. This time was what historians call the migration period. We are going to be looking towards the end of this period, specifically what happened in the middle of the 6th century, because after the previous growth in Scandinavia, there was a steep decline in the number of settlements and graves. Therefore, woodlands grew back over the previously cultivated fields. There was also a change in art and language. The decorative schemes and the spoken language that have been in use for centuries suddenly changed. But what caused this shift in culture and way of life in Scandinavians? It is not unreasonable to suggest that many Scandinavians would have served as mercenaries in the empire. But with the end of the empire, these highly skilled fighters were out of work. They could have returned home and wreaked havoc in search of wealth. This undermined the previous way of life and created a world of petty warlords. A discovery in 2010 at the fortress of Sandbyborg on the island of Åland provides evidence that raiding was very common during this period. Also, a number of fortifications were constructed along the coast, from Danish Bornholm to Gotland, and some further inland as well. Other researchers have also suggested a major role for the Huns led by Attila. They not only brought violence, but also artistic influence and new trains of thought. Their impact can be especially seen in religion, where Norse beliefs paralleled steppe culture. While these influences were important, in reshaping some parts of Scandinavian culture, it was something else that changed their way of life in a major way. In the year 536 and 540, there were at least 2 volcanic eruptions of almost unprecedented magnitude. But it wasn't just the volcanic eruptions. The Justinian plague started to spread in 540. It was the same bacterium that spread in Europe in the 14th century. This appeared during the already dreadful period for the world population. Then in 547, a third major eruption may have followed. The effects of these were devastating. It is fair to say that this was probably one of the worst decades to be alive in human history. The location of the first eruption is one of volcanology's great mysteries. The current best guess is Iceland, but it also could have been in North America. But the second one was at Lake Ilopango in today's El Salvador. The explosion was so large that the entire volcano collapsed and left only a flooded crater so large it could contain the country's capital. The explosion produced up to 87 cubic kilometers of ejecta, and the sulfate may have measured up to 200 megatons. To put this into perspective, the 87 cubic kilometers of ejecta would be enough to cover Denmark's entire land area in 2 meters of volcanic debris, or fill Lake Mälaren 6 times. And the 200 megatons of sulfate has roughly the same mass as the water in 80,000 Olympic-size swimming pools. These are the highest measurements in world history, roughly double than the Tombora eruption in 1815, which is the second highest. But what do these numbers mean in practice? How did this affect the world? The sun was darkened by a hazy mist that allowed no heat to penetrate. At night it was like a sunset that went on for months. This is what scientists call a dust veil. It was like a nuclear winter. Trees began to wither and their growth halted. Plants started dying, limiting the food supply for every living being. In Scandinavia, an estimated loss of life was as high as 50% of the population. But it wasn't just there that these effects could be felt. From North America to Europe, the harsh conditions were consistent. In Europe and China, written sources describe harvest failures and the same weather events. Procopius from the Byzantine Empire describes in his book Wars the weather events that took place in 536. During this year, a most dread portent took place, for the sun gave forth its light without brightness, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. The Chinese sources also confirm this. In the first year of the Tai era, snow fell in the summer and the crops failed. For Scandinavians, this was catastrophic, as Northern Europe's harsh environment didn't make survival easy. Norwegians especially were hit hard, as only 3% of the land is suitable for farming there. Because of this, their agricultural output was very vulnerable to any climate shift or temperature fluctuation. So the temperatures falling by at least 2 degrees Celsius, or even 3 to 4 in some places, made this especially disastrous. The worst of these events went on for 3 years, but the dust veil persisted for up to 80. But now we will start to observe how these real-life events reflected in mythology. Geomythology is the study of oral and written traditions created by pre-scientific cultures to account for geological events and phenomena, often in poetic or mythological imagery. This concept in general is very hard to prove. However, there is a very compelling case to be made for it here. It's possible where the Viking Age may have originated was the imagination of its end. Here is an example from the Voluspa that describes the Fimbulwinter. Black becomes the sun's beam in the summers that follow. Weather's all treacherous. The wolf eats the moon, and the stars fall into the sea. The heat rises a great steam over the sky. We can also draw comparison to the neighboring Finns mythology, the Kalevala. There was a legend of ongoing darkening of the celestial bodies and the sky by the mistress of the northern land, who captures the sun and the moon. What wonders block out the moon? What fog is in the sun's way? That the moon gleams not at all. Still the sun is not shining, nor the golden moon gleaming. The veldt grows chilly. The herds get into a dreadful state. strange to the birds of the air, tiresome to the mankind, that the sun will never shine, nor will the moon gleam. It is not very likely to be a coincidence that during this time the burning sun will, which was a central motif of Scandinavian society, disappeared. Instead, golden bracteates and other precious metals were offered up in search of help from higher powers to stop the increasingly fracturing society. Another poem from the Voluspa shows how this fracturing happened. Brothers will fight each other and be each other's bane, sisters' children, ravage kinship. In the world it is hard, great whoredom, an axe age, a sword age, shields are cloven, a wind age, a wolf age, before the world collapses. No one will spare another. These poems help us imagine how the demographic trauma of the climate crisis affected Scandinavians, and allows us to see how the social bond that for centuries held these communities together broke. There was also a big change in language. The situation created a unique linguistic environment. Children surviving the catastrophe needed to acquire language from a drastically reduced pool of adult speakers, many of whom were non-native speakers. This was due to population mixing, displacement, and regional migration patterns. Linguistics call this a learning crisis, allowing rapid change in the language. It was changing so quickly that the younger generation spoke a completely different language to their grandparents. The Proto-Norse languages that Scandinavians spoke during this time were originally a North Germanic dialect. It was the language of the oldest runic inscriptions. These inscriptions in Elder Futhark were very common in the region prior to 536. But after the volcanic events, approximately from 550 to 650, this has changed. The inscriptions disappeared, and when they came back after 650, these would exhibit radical linguistic changes. The Proto-Norse languages disappeared, giving birth to Old Norse. That all being said, the volcanic winter might not have been the sole cause for this grand societal change, but it made it so that these changes happened quicker. There is also an argument against the Dustfill and Fimbulwinter theory. That is, that the Scandinavian world did not end in the mid-6th century, but in the myth of Ragnarök, the world didn't completely end either. Two humans, Leif and Lifthrasir, survived by hiding in the world tree, Yggdrasil, and after the chaos subsides, they will repopulate the earth and build a new society, just like the survivors of the Dustfell would build a society that would later become the Viking Age.